You're watching Let the Quran Speak. Recently we spoke with Dr. Altaf Husain. He's a professor at the Howard University School of Social Work in Washington, D.C. Here's Ilyas Ali with Dr. Husain discussing the importance of community service.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spent his entire life in the service of people. In fact, he personally took care of the poor who came to his mosque. What is the importance of service in Islam? What do the Quran and the example of the Prophet teach us about community service? To discuss these questions, we have with us Dr. Altaf Husain. He has a PhD in social work from Howard University in Washington, D.C., and is active in community work all across the United States. Dr. Altaf Husain, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you so much.
So you want to tell us a little bit about community service in Islam, but before we jump into that, can you tell us a little bit about your background in social work and how that relates to community service?
Sure. How I came into the field was that I followed the typical trajectory of Asian immigrant children, if you will. And I did my undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering. And while I was doing that degree, I was also involved in the residence halls and the dormitories serving as a resident assistant. I came to see firsthand what it feels like to do counseling, in a basic level counseling. And I found an interest in serving on campus through various avenues. So what I did is I actually translated that interest into actual action by getting a master's degree in social work. And that really, that example for me came from my own parents, who on the weekends would spend time in the community, visiting people who had been ill or trying to help somebody who was in need. And so those behaviors were modeled for me early on. And that's how I entered into the field of social work. And then I've gotten my PhD since then, and now I teach at the School of Social Work.
And of course, the idea behind social work of helping those who are underprivileged or those who are in financial need or some kind of social need is something that's deeply rooted in religion as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how that comes from the Quran and comes from the teachings of the Prophet?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of times people, in this current socio-political climate, will talk about a lot of themes that they hear in the news and the media about the Quran, but rarely will people actually ask the question, well, when the revelation started, what were the themes being emphasized? What was the message being emphasized? And if we share that with people, and if they themselves read the Quran and the history of it, they'll find out that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the initial verses that were revealed to him talked about how to get closer to God, one had to serve humanity. One had to analyze the conditions around him or her in society, and look at the condition of the vulnerable, the oppressed, the at-risk populations. So the earliest verses started telling the people, especially of Arabia, but it's a universal message and it's a timeless message. So they essentially said that look at the person who denies the day of judgment or the day of reckoning when we'll all stand before God. What are the characteristics of that kind of person? And the Quran tells us that the characteristics, among the characteristics are, and in Arabic it says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who denies the day of reckoning or the day of judgment? That person is فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. That this is the person who shuns the orphans. وَلَا يَحُدُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. This is the person who prohibits or who kind of stops the feeding of the poor. And so you start to realize that if they're doing these things, then the orphans are sometimes in vulnerable positions because they have no guardians perhaps immediately. The poor are sort of left vulnerable in society. So if that person is pushing these people away, then he or she has no heart from which to care, a standpoint from which to look out for the well-being of others. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in the Quran, and then through the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has essentially said, you want to draw closer to me. To do that, you have to serve these people first. Serve the needy, the orphans, in our current language, homeless, the hungry among us, those who may be without health care, as in the current context of the costs of health care, they may not have health care. Those who may be financially not well off. And all of these values essentially combine to say that the message is that think of others and think about their well-being. and the improvement of their lives.
Can you give any examples, either from early Islamic history or from present day life, of how Muslims have actualized that teaching and have actually served humanity?
Sure. So in two ways. As you mentioned in the introduction, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was himself actively helping those who were vulnerable in society. They had, the Islam in its teachings tells us to be charitable, to share of our wealth, to spend from our wealth. So those examples abound in terms of his life. The amazing thing is that for people who even, we're talking about human beings and being kind and compassionate, but this even extends to the domain of the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, to the extent that the Prophet, peace be upon him, narrated a story to his companions about the instance of a man who was thirsty in the desert and had found a well of water, had gone with his leather moccasin of that time period and filled it with water and had drank from it. And as he came, he found a dog panting in the desert from the heat and the lack of water. And out of compassion for that dog, the man went, filled his moccasin again, and fed the dog and quenched the thirst of the dog. This example, the Prophet said, was powerful enough to earn for that man the entrance into paradise. And the baffling thing for modern day society is that in some cases we have placed the well-being, the welfare of animals in some cases above even that of taking care of our human brothers and sisters of all faiths and backgrounds. So we are saying that in Islam it's a collective idea. You look at the welfare of human beings, of the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and so that was the example from the early days where all of the companions of the Prophet were invested in that. In the present day, I can give you several examples, one of which is the idea that we have soup kitchens and we have shelters for women, battered women. We have facilities which are providing, especially in the context of North America and in the United States, where medical students, Muslim medical students, developed a clinic whereby they sought the cooperation of other medical residents, medical students of other faiths to volunteer their services to provide healthcare free for those who couldn't afford it. So we are seeing the translation of the Quranic message and the allowance, if you will, for the teachings to speak through the actions of these believers. And they do it, and this is the crux of the matter, and everyone should reflect on this. They do it seeking no reward. They do it seeking no gratitude. They do it seeking no publicity. They do it so that even if no one took notice of it, they would be content, because they're not doing it for any kind of a political message or a publicity stunt. They're doing it because they are driven by a feeling, which is a verse in the Quran, where an instance of where people were being fed who were prisoners of war, and the verse says to say to them, for the Muslims, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ, that indeed we feed you seeking the countenance of Allah. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا, that we seek from you neither reward nor do we seek from you gratitude. And that's a critical central part, because Muslims should remind ourselves first that in as much as we want to help our fellow brothers and sisters who are Muslims, that these verses and these messages in the Quran are entirely universal. That we should do this not looking at the nationality, the ethnicity, the religion, the race, if you will, the socioeconomic status of the people in need. We should do it and provide it for everyone. And that translates into community service, because then you have institutions that serve these populations.
And even if nobody's paying attention or nobody's, you're not getting publicity or press from that, but we need to have a sincerity of intention is what's stressed by the Quran.
Correct. And this is, I think, especially important at a time when the mention of Islam in the media and in the news and by even elected officials is often in the context of something negative in the current climate. So somebody may think, oh, these Muslims are just trying to do this and show good deeds because they want us to change our impression about them. No, this would be a very futile and short-term way of thinking for the Muslims. We are thinking a longer term about our stance in front of God. We are thinking about how we will be held accountable in front of God when we were blessed with resources and the ability to thrive in Canadian and North American society, what did we do with those blessings? Did we in fact share the blessings from Allah with those who are vulnerable and at risk? Did we improve the condition of life for others, and so on?
So, as someone with a background in social work, how would you advise Muslims and non-Muslims who want to do more, to help people and to help society? What steps should they take?
Well, first, I say to people that you should think for yourself if you have the stamina to serve people, because not everybody can do it. And this is a kind of this is an area in which we need consistency. We don't need people to just jump up on one Saturday morning, go and feed the hungry, and then never think about it again. We want them to think through and say, can I sustain these efforts? And if I can, then as I get involved, it will reflect in my consistency. Secondly, we ask them to specialize, that you may not be able to solve all of the problems of the world, but don't worry. Choose one problem. Choose something local, something closer to your home, in your neighborhood perhaps, that you can have access to, that you can learn about, that you can read about, you can specialize. And then go about trying to come up with some concrete steps that your skill set can be lent to solve or address those problems. And it could be anything. You could be a professional in accounting and the local institution that's serving the hungry and the homeless. You could volunteer your services as an accountant to help them. You could be an engineer, and you may improve the ability to deliver the meals in a more efficient manner in terms of the assembly line process or whatever. Or you may be a writer, and you could blog about these institutions and the work that they're doing to help disseminate the message through social networking and others. So it's almost endless in terms of the opportunities that people can have to translate their desire to serve into something sustainable and God willing, something that will in front of God weigh their scales of good deeds and things that may have been displeasing to God, that there will be more good deeds in the scale, and that God will accept their efforts.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Altaf Husain, for telling us about social work and about how to serve the community. I hope that we can all learn from that, and we can, go out there and benefit our communities in a sustainable way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Dr. Altaf Husain, a professor at the Howard University School of Social Work in Washington, D.C. Dr. Husain was speaking to Ilyas Ali about the importance of community service. We'll take a short break. When we return, we will answer questions we received from you, our viewers.